If this is the first time that you tune into one of my streams, my name is Leo Marte. I am a Christian financial advisor. I'm a certified financial planner. I run a firm called Abundant Advisors. And tonight, we're going to be talking about how to 10x your money. It's actually a theme, a topic that was suggested by one of our viewers from a previous stream. And I thought it would be a good conversation to engage in tonight. Now, before we go into the details of our topic, I want to remind you that first of all, you can join our Facebook group, Abundant Money. That's the group that we use to, share some of the resources from the show, and also get feedback from people that want to be part of setting the agenda for future streams. So if you have ideas, questions, or anything that you want to share, definitely make sure that you join Abundant Money so that we can hear your thoughts. And it's very easy to join. The links are going to be available under the stream. So thank you for that. I also wanted to bring to your attention that we have the chat enabled in all of our platforms. So throughout the stream, I'm going to be asking questions, hoping to engage all of you in this conversation as well, get your ideas, get your potential guesses and some of the questions and scenarios that we're going to look at tonight. So definitely keep your eye on the chat. Make sure that you're participating throughout the stream, because it's going to be a little bit different of a stream than probably the ones that you've joined before. We're going to get into a couple of situations, scenarios that we're going to be debating together tonight. Now, as I mentioned before, the topic tonight was driven by a viewer who wanted to know how to multiply money. A couple of the streams that we've done recently have been really on the behavioral side of money management. So talking about things like your relationship with money, discussing some of the pitfalls of managing wealth and how to keep yourself centered and grounded. But today, we're actually going to be going a little bit more into the math, a little technical direction, if you may, where we're actually going to look at the secret sauce. We're going to talk about different ways that people invest money that they use to multiply that money over time. And the key tool that I'm going to share with you tonight to help you think about investments and investment returns is something called the Rule of 72. It's actually a shorthand for calculating how long it takes for an investment to double, depending on how much of a return you're getting. We're also going to discuss some prerequisites before we dive into that conversation that are required in order for you to be able to effectively build money over time. And we're going to talk about 3 specific ways in which you can invest your money. And I will show you with the math how that money can multiply by 10 over time. So definitely stay connected and stay engaged in this conversation. Who is this conversation for? It is primarily for working professionals, although if you're a retiree and you're just curious about how to continue to manage your money effectively, absolutely join, be part of this conversation. Definitely everyone is invited to listen, regardless of the age group, regardless of your level of wealth. I think that you're going to get some things out of this conversation that are hopefully going to allow you to build more wealth over time. Now, before I get started, I'm curious, for those that are already connected to the stream, have you ever heard about the parable of the talents? So one of the most famous parables, many people have heard about it from the Bible. So if you've heard about the parable of the talents, feel free to chime in the chat. I would love to hear if you have heard it before. And as we get some of those responses, I want to mention as well, again, this is the first time that you're joining us, typically we start these conversations with a guiding principle. So usually a Bible lesson or Bible reference or a verse that guides our conversation, keeps us grounded, and ensures that we are ultimately talking about things that really matter. So if you've heard about the parable of the talents, definitely make sure that you tell us in the chat, no matter what platform you're in. If you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, let us know. I would love to know if you've heard about that. Now, the parable of the talents is a bit of a long section of scripture. It's actually Matthew chapter 25, verse 14 through 30. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to cover the entire parable, but I'm going to cover just a couple of things that you want to know. Verse 19 of the parable says, Basically, the context of the story is a master left a certain amount of money and resources in the hands of a servant, of three servants actually, and goes away, expects the servants to look after his money, and then comes back and is asking for the account from all the servants to know how they invested the money, what they did with the money while he was absent. So the master comes back and calls the servants one by one. The first servant in verse 19, has a conversation with the master and says, in verse 20, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master, of course, is very happy about this, is celebrating and acknowledging and congratulating the servant for multiplying his money from 5 to 10 bags of silver. Then in verse 22, the servant that only received 2 bags of silver comes and says, "Hey, master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." And as you might have expected from the first servant that was part of the story, the master responded in the same ways, very enthusiastic, acknowledging his success and congratulating him for being a good servant. And then the third servant received only 1 bag of silver, and they acted a little bit differently. They responded to the master, "I knew you were harsh, man, harvesting crops that you did not plant and gathering crops you did not cultivate. I was really afraid of losing this money. So what I did was I dug a hole, I hid it in the earth, and look, here's your money back." And the servant was thinking that he had done the right thing by protecting his master's money. But the master was not very happy about this. He replies and essentially calls him lazy, wicked, and even tells him, "Hey, you might as well have taken it to the money lender so that I could have gained some interest at least, instead of digging a hole and burying the money." Now, before we move on, I just want to clarify. Jesus used money as an object lesson in a lot of his parables. The ultimate purpose of this parable was not necessarily talking about money. It was actually talking about gifts in general. But for the purposes of this conversation, I thought that was a really good starting point, because it talks about the concept of stewardship and how good managers we can be, and how we can be recognized for managing wealth appropriately. Before we dive into some of the technical aspects of multiplying your money by 10, I want to just start the conversation on the basis of 3 criteria, 3 things that I believe you need to have going on before you have any hope of building wealth over the long term. And the number one is you have to be willing to live below your means. If you're not able to save, you cannot create wealth. If you have discipline of delaying pleasure, living below your means today, so that you can invest consistently in all weathers, good weather, bad weather, no matter what's happening in the world, if you are able to live below your means and contribute money to your investment accounts over time, you're likely going to be successful. Number 2, you have to be patient. It takes time to 10x your money. And I intentionally left the time frame out of the title of the video, because I knew many of you would probably be interested in hearing about 10xing your money. I would expect that would happen very quickly. But the truth is that 10xing your money takes time. And it's important to know that if someone is offering you quick returns, if somebody is offering you this fancy new way to multiply your money many times over without you taking any risk, you should run in the opposite direction, because more often than not, this is a bad idea. And it's preying on people's desires to become rich quick, and tends to land people in trouble, scams, losing their money altogether. So patience is number 2. And the third piece is education. Even if you're able to live below your means, even if you're patient and you're not rushing the process, if you don't know what to put your money into, you're not going to be successful. If you live below your means and you're patient, but you put all your money in a savings account that is giving you 0.01%, it is likely your money is never going to grow, and it's going to take hundreds of years for your money to multiply. And that's why it's so important for you to be educated about how money is multiplied, how it is invested, so that you know where to allocate the hard-earned money that you're setting aside in a disciplined way over a long period of time. So, has anyone in the stream heard about the rule of 72? And if you have, I would also love to hear that. So feel free to participate in the chat. Type in, if you haven't heard about the rule of 72, that's okay. Just type in no. I would love to get an idea of how many people are familiar with this concept. And while I get some responses in the chat, I just wanted to give you an introduction of what the rule of 72 is, assuming that some people probably have not heard about it. So the rule of 72 gives us information. It helps us evaluate the growth potential of something. And it's just a shortcut. It's not really designed to be precise math, but it gives you a good estimate of how much you're going to end up having. So our friends from AB Ridgeway Wealth Management, yes, the rule of 72 is about how to double your money specifically, and at what percentage you need to do it. So when you look at the rule of 72, it'll become evident that it is not that hard of a calculation to make, but it's going to give you a sense of how long it'll take for you to double your money based on a specific rate of return. Or you can also know from the rule of 72 how much return do you need to double your money in a specific period of time. Now, I looked at an article on CNBC about the rule of 72, and Kathleen Elkins is a journalist on CNBC talking about what the rule of 72 is and how it works. And Katrina, this is probably going to help you understand even better the concept of the rule of 72. Thank you for participating in the chat. The rule of 72 can give you an idea of how many doubles you'll get in your lifetime, doubles of your money. And with more time, a lower interest rate may give you enough to nail your goals. But if you have less time to make money grow, you're going to need a higher percent of return, a higher interest rate or rate of return in order to make your money double. The formula is not that hard. You simply divide 72 by the interest rate or rate of return that you're able to get in an investment. So, for example, if you have an investment that gives you a 10% return, you divide 72 by 10, and it'll give you 7.2 years before your money doubles. So if you start with $1,000 and put it in an investment at 10% rate of return, you're going to wait 7.2 years, and this is assuming you get that average return all those years, and you're going to land with $2,000 at the end of that 7.2 years. Very simple. 72 divided by the number of years will give you the rate of return, or 72 divided by the rate of return will give you the number of years that you need to wait in order for your money to double. Now, the rule of 72 is a really helpful tool because it gives you some of that information. But I wanted also to give you some specific examples of ways in which you can invest your money and expect it to multiply by 10 over time. Now, by a way of guessing, I would love to hear from the audience how many years you think it takes to multiply your money by 10 in the stock market. If you had to make a wild guess, I would love to hear what you think. How many years do you think it'll take for me to put $1 in the stock market and be able to get $2 out of the stock market? I would love to hear your thoughts in the chat as I introduce our first example. Matthew says 5 years. 5 years to double your return. I wish. I would be very, very happy if people could just assume to double their money in 5 years. Good guess, but it's going to take a little bit longer, and I'll explain why. Any other guesses about how long it would take, how many years to 10x your money in the stock market? Any other guesses from the audience? Either any platform, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, if you're on LinkedIn, I would love to hear, your thoughts about that. Katrina says 100 years. Oh man, yes. It'll take a little bit, but not that long. Hopefully, we'll get you to double your money in less than 100 years, and I'll show you exactly how. But good guess, good guess. We have 5 years. We have 100 years. Any guesses in between those two numbers? Any guesses that I may have from people in the live audience that could maybe get a little bit closer between 5 and 100 years? All right. So while we wait for some other guesses, I wanted to sort of set some parameters around stock market investing. So I'm going to give you an example, and the example is going to be based on $10,000. That's your investment that you're going to put in to the market, and you're not going to add a single dollar in that period of time. You're just going to keep that $10,000 in that account. You're not going to touch it, and you're going to leave it invested in a well-diversified portfolio in the stock market. You're going to assume about an 8% rate of return. The market has done, depending on how you invest your money, the S&P 500 has exceeded that on average over a very long period of time. But let's assume an 8% return, because I think it's more reasonable, more realistic to base your math on an 8% return. And in order to show you this example, I'm actually going to pull up an investment calculator for your benefit, so that you can actually see these numbers in action. So this investment calculator is going to show me, as I mentioned, $10,000 as the starting amount. And I am going to give it 30 years for the sake of this example. The typical amount of time that an investor saves for as a professional who is working and who is saving, putting money aside, 30 years is a reasonable amount. Let's say 8% rate of return. It's going to compound annually. But I'm going to say no contributions. I don't want you to add a single dollar into this portfolio for 30 years and see where it gets us. And there you see the result. $10,000 for 30 years at 8% return gives us $100,000 and some change above and beyond the 100,000. So if you are assuming an 8% rate of return, it is fair to assume as well that your money is going to take roughly about 30 years to multiply by 10. Now, if you were to calculate how much it would take for your money to double, remember that rule of 72? Well, the rule of 72 tells us that if you divide 72 by that 8% rate of return, you get 9 years. So if you were to change in this calculator $10,000 and do it for 9 years instead of the 30, growing at the same rate of 8%, you would roughly have $20,000. The calculation came about $10 short, but you get the point. So that's why the rule of 72 is so helpful, because it can give you a very fast mental shortcut to calculate how long it would take for you to double the money. If you are looking at how long it's going to take you to multiply this number by 10, that's where a calculator like this particular investment calculator can help you map out how long it would take for you to get to 10 times of your return. Now, you may ask yourself, it's okay. I mean, the stock market is a good place to invest money, but I'm not a really big fan of stocks. I don't like the risk. It's just the ups and downs of the market make me nervous. I love touching my investments. I love seeing a building, seeing a duplex, having a rental. And people ask me all the time, hey, how can I invest my money in a rental property and how long it'll take me for me to have that money grow? So, we have some guesses for the stock market, anywhere between 5 and 100 years. And I would love to hear your thoughts about how long you think in real estate, in a typical average rental property, how long do you think it would take for you to 10x your money? So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. And while I hear those thoughts, I am getting a chat from Matthew. Where can we find that investment calculator? So the easiest way to access that is to visit calculator.net. It's a website that offers free calculators on a broad spectrum of different investments. If you want to get there quicker, just type into Google investment calculator and look for the result that comes from calculator.net. It's very easy to use. You can plug in your numbers and you can figure out, how much return or how much money you will have over a certain period of time. Any guesses about how long it will take for money in real estate to multiply by 10? And feel free to send those ideas, those thoughts through the chat. While we get some of those responses, I want to set the parameters for our next example of real estate. We're going to purchase an average home in the United States. That is a home that costs around $250,000. We're going to assume a 20% down payment, and we're going to get a 30-year loan on that property. We're going to pay about $3,000 in closing costs. And the amount of rent that's going to come in from that house is about $1,800 per month. The rental is going to be self-managed, so you're not going to pay somebody to manage it for you. And when you're looking at investing in real estate, something that you have to be aware of is that you have certain risks that you don't have, for example, when you invest in the stock market. When you invest in real estate, you're investing in a specific town, neighborhood. You are sort of subject to the growth rate of the house in that area. So for that reason, we've chosen just some example inputs because we cannot possibly estimate an accurate example for every part of the country. You may be in a part of the country where the average house is $1 million. And, this example would probably, work for you if you just play with the numbers a little bit. So Matthew says 25 years. And Matthew, you're very, very close. I'm actually going to show you another calculator that comes from the same website, calculator.net. But this calculator is going to have a couple of different inputs. We're going to put that purchase price to $150,000. You'll see the down payment that is showing here in the form, about 20%. We're just going to pick a 4.5% interest rate. Right now, the interest rate environment is a little bit lower than that, but just for the sake of the example, we're just going to go with some of the default inputs. A loan term of 30 years, closing cost of $3,000. And remember that monthly rent is going to be around $1,800. So when you plug in these numbers, also don't forget to zero out your management fee so you get the same numbers that I have here. And if you want to see how much it would take or how much it would cost for you to do the management fee, typically management fees are around 10% of the rent collected. So you might want to plug that in. I just put an average appreciation in value of about 3%. That's the average in the country. And then all of these inputs about operating expenses are also fairly average. So if you hit calculate, you're going to see that this particular property, by holding the property for a period of time of about 30 years, you're going to get about a 17% rate of return. Now, that rate of return is a combination of all the rent money that you're going to get over the years and also the equity that you're building in the house itself that you will get to take out when you sell it at the end of the 30 years. Now, I did the math for you because, you're going to get a table with a whole bunch of inputs and cash flow and all of that. But right around year 20, if you add up all of the cash flow that you've received from day one until year 20, And then you add that to the proceeds after paying fees, which is the number in this second to last column, you're going to get right around $500,000, which is 10 times that 20% down payment that we put in this $250,000 house. So, Matthew, that's why I said that you were so close, because you were about 5 years off, but you're very, very close about the time that it takes to multiply your money by 10 in real estate. So, that's our second example. Now, some people may tell me, you know what, Leo, I understand the stock market is exciting. I'm not really into the hassle of investing in real estate. I don't want to deal with tenants. I don't want to deal with repairs. I don't want somebody calling me at 3 a.m. because their toilet is overflowing. So I don't think the whole tenant thing is for me. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to build a business, and I want to know how much time it will take for me to build a business that multiplies my initial investment in that business by 10. And I'm going to give you an example of what that could look like. Now, remember, there's a myriad of businesses that have different models, different revenue, different profits. So I am not going to presume to give you a universal rule, but I'm going to give you some standard criteria that I believe are going to give you a good idea of how this could work out. I would love to hear your guess of how many years it would take if you ran your own business, how many years it would take to multiply your investment by 10. And I would love to hear that information as I am going to be talking through the example in a couple of seconds here. Now, if you're looking at talking about business, we're going to have to get into a couple of more assumptions because, again, as I said, no business is standard, but I'm going to use some reasonable assumptions that I think you'll find to be somewhat accurate. So let's say that you build your own business and you want to create something that multiplies your initial investment by 10. I'm going to use an example of a service business. Why? Because I'm in a service business. I serve people. So the revenue of my business is based on the service that I provide somebody. I'm not building widgets. I don't run a factory. I don't have 100, 200 people working for me, manufacturing things. The essence of my business as a financial advisor is a service business. I'm going to say that the capital requirement to start a service business is medium. And I'm going to call medium in a second. But let's just say that the type of business that I'm talking about, the way that it's valued when it's going to be sold is the value of the business equals roughly 2 times the revenue that the business brings in. So that's our kind of basic valuation methodology. I'll say that the initial investment is $25,000. So you're going to save, you're going to work hard, you're going to save money, and you're going to put these $25,000. You're going to open your business bank account and off you go. You're going to start getting your clients. You're going to start offering a service that people want to purchase from you. Well, let's say that in your first year, you make $10,000. Nothing to scream about, but certainly more money than you had before you started the business that is coming from that business, right? Day one, you make $0, but by the end of year one, you've made $10,000. Let's say you work real hard, and in year 2, you double your revenue from 10 to 20,000. You've had 100% growth. But here's the catch. 20% of the businesses that started with you fail. So the risk is much higher. When you're working for yourself and you have your own business, the risk meter goes up significantly. So these are statistics from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So these are official government numbers. So 20% of businesses fail within the first 2 years of being open. But let's say that you're part of the 80% that survives and you keep going on and you work hard, and the next year you've doubled your revenue again, and now you're making $40,000 from that business. You've had another 100% year. But year four, it starts getting hard to double your return again, double that amount of revenue. So in the next year, you actually grew your revenue by 50%. But now that you've made 60,000 off of your business, you're actually able to quit your day job and transition into the business and start working full time. The business now sustains your expenses so you can go full force, work full time, quit your job, and start working on the business. Want to know something grim? 50% of the people you started with in year one that were other entrepreneurs starting their businesses have now failed. So by you being alive at year five, you're automatically in the top 50% of the people that started at the same time as you did. You've worked hard and you've increased your revenue now to $80,000. And year six, now you're at $100,000. You're killing it. 25% growth year over year. And then in year seven, you finally get to $125,000 of revenue. You have crushed it. You have worked hard. You have attracted a book of clients and worked with a number of people that love your service. And now you have a stable, maturing business that's generating $125,000 in revenue. Well, let me tell you, based on our valuation metric, the value at year seven is roughly about $250,000. Remember that valuation metric I gave you? We're assuming that this business's value is calculated as 2 times revenue. So at year seven, you've now made $250,000 in business value, in equity in your business. So if you were to decide to leave this business, sell it to a competitor, sell it to somebody else that wants to take it over, you can expect that your money has grown 10 times in 7 years. What is the annual rate of return of an investment that grows 10 times in 7 years? And that annual rate of return is about 39% rate of return. Now, your eyes are probably popping when you're seeing the fact that 39% is a very high number and is very hard to get that number in any sort of public stock market investment of any kind. And you will be right in making that assumption. These kinds of rates of return are usually only possible when you're dealing with private businesses and primarily where the individual is putting all of its human capital to work in that business. Private businesses have some of the highest growth potentials than any other type of investment if they succeed. And that is the key. The key is you have to succeed. Because remember, 50% of businesses will fail in the first 5 years. And the numbers don't get any prettier after 5 years. By the time you get to 10, 15 years old, 60%, 70% of businesses have failed as well. So it's not only a matter of getting the revenue, but you also have to stay on and you have to survive and you have to thrive when every other competitor and people that are building businesses are failing left and right. So you get a 39% return, but it comes at a significant risk to yourself because you're working for you now. And it also comes at a risk because the odds are stacked against you. Now, you may say, but Leo, I love being in an entrepreneurial environment, but I'm not actually going to start the business. I'm going to go work for a private business, a startup that gives me growth opportunity, gives me the opportunity to buy equity into that company. And then I'm going to IPO and, be a tech millionaire or billionaire. Well, yes, you can do that. That is a different way to tap into private company equity or private returns. And I specialize in my firm also to work with people that receive executive compensation in the form of stock, and also people who work at technology startups and get stock options. Now, you may not be super familiar with what a stock option is, but basically an option is nothing more than a contract that allows you to buy a stock at a specific price regardless of how much that stock is worth today, either as a private company or in the stock market. And I'll explain a little more as I show you my example. Let's say that you want to buy into this company. You're starting in a startup, pun intended, and let's say your capital requirement is going to be low to medium. Your stock options are not going to require a lot of cash, relatively speaking, as if you were starting your own business. But let's say that your option initial value is $10. You are given the opportunity, the privilege of buying a stock in a private company at $10 a share. And you're given 1,000 options. So you can buy 1,000 shares of stock at $10 each. So if you do the math, that's $10,000 that you're going to invest in order to exercise that option and take hold of those stocks, put it in your account. But what happens, 3 years later, after you start working in that company, your company goes to an IPO, an initial public offering. Your company goes from being a privately held corporation to being traded in the stock market. And if you have been keeping up lately with the developments in the stock market, you know that IPOs have gotten a lot of attention in the last few months. There's a lot of money in IPOs being made right now by companies that have a lot of innovation and growth potential that are coming into the public markets. So let's say that the company you start working at goes into an IPO 3 years after you start working there. Remember, you have $10,000 invested in the stock. But the IPO price of your company is $100. And here's one of the biggest potentials for gain when you work in a technology startup. Your IPO price tends to be on the higher end, typically, and your initial value could be a very low value to actually purchase the stock to begin with. So the value at IPO of those $10,000 that you put in just 3 years later turns into $100,000, 10x. And the return is about 115% annually. It's a crazy return, insane. But let me tell you a little bit about the risks. When you're working in a startup, you can lose your job any day. The startup can crash and burn. You put in $10,000 and you may lose every single dollar you put into that investment. But if the startup goes on IPO, and you actually are able to make it past that holding period that is required by law because you're an employee and you have to wait until everybody else buys their stock to sell yours. If you're patient and you have the right strategy, you can 10x your money in a very short period of time. Now, that doesn't happen in every startup. That is not the price of every IPO. That is not the difference between every option and every IPO out there. But that's just an example to give you a taste for what that could look like. So if you know people who work in the technology field or are attracted to working in that part of the business, definitely encourage them to be in a place where they can get equity in the company, because it's one of the greatest ways to really leverage your money by exercising stocks, options that you may get when you get employed, and be able to multiply that significantly over time. So there you go, guys. I give you 3 ways to 10x your money. And I gave you that bonus of using IPO stock if you work in a technology startup to 10x that same amount of money. Now, one of the key takeaways of our conversation, 10xing your money is very much possible. But it takes patience and it takes a certain appetite for risk depending on how quickly you want to do that. The more you're involved directly in the business and exposed to that risk, the higher the likelihood that you're getting a larger rate of return. But the risk of loss could be significantly higher than if you have just a plain vanilla stock balanced portfolio where the worst year that we've seen for the S&P 500 is about a 39% drop. In an IPO situation, in a small startup, your investment can be worth zero. If you own a rental property, you can have a fabulous return, 17% return, but you're exposed to liability. Somebody falls in that property. If you don't repair that property, you're now exposed to legal liability. So you have to deal with some of the complexities of a higher return investment. If you decide to go create your own business, good for you. I want you to succeed. But realize that 50% of people who do that fail in the first 5 years. So there's a high return potential for your money and for your lifetime earnings, but that comes at a cost. You're going to assume a lot more risk. And sadly, depending on the business that you may have and depending on the amount of leverage lending that people incur to start a business, I've seen sad situations where business owners even go bankrupt because not only is the business folding, but they've also have to pay loans in order to keep the business running and sacrifice even their own assets, their home, their car, and things that get touched in a bankruptcy proceeding to be able to satisfy some of those loans. So, the higher the risk, the higher the reward. But you have to realize that 10xing your money is going to require patience, an appetite for risk, or both. I hope you like the conversation, and I hope that these pointers help you think about how to create a portfolio or how to think about investing your money so that you can grow your money in the long term. Now, I'd love to answer some final questions that folks in the audience may have. There is the YNAB method. Andres just asked me a question from YouTube. Do you know the YNAB method? So YNAB is a widely used budgeting tool. You need a budget. And the idea behind YNAB is that you allocate your savings, or not your savings, your expenses before the month begins. If you're familiar with the Dave Ramsey method, it's actually very similar to the Dave Ramsey method of managing your personal finances. And the whole thing is you're allocating your income before the month begins on everything that you want to do. Now, YNAB is a method to save, to create money, wealth that you can then invest. It is by itself not an investment vehicle. So you have to be mindful that it's only going to take you halfway. You're going to have to become educated in the different ways in which you can invest that money and then actually put the money to work over time. Any other final questions before we wrap up for the evening? I would love to answer any thoughts from the viewers that are watching. And if you get to listen to this conversation afterwards and you want to be part of the conversation in an ongoing basis, whether you look at a replay of this video on social networks, or if you listen to our podcast where we will be sharing the content that we share tonight as well, definitely make sure you join our Facebook group. It's called Abundant Money. The link is going to be right under the stream on YouTube, so you can click directly and request to join the group. Ask your questions, be part of the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope that this conversation helps you to build wealth over the long term.